The primary purpose of Uniquely Human, the podcast, is to educate and inform. The views expressed during all episodes are solely those of the individuals involved and do not constitute educational or medical advice. Listeners should consult with professionals familiar with each individual or family for specific guidance.
Uniquely Human, the podcast, is produced by Elevated Studio. Music is graciously provided by Matt Savage of Savage Records.
Hi, I'm Dr. Barry Prezant, clinical scholar, researcher, and consultant on autism and neurodiversity, and a Brooklyn boy raised in the big city.
And I'm Dave. I'm none of those things, and I grew up on a farm in Illinois. But being on the spectrum myself, I have plenty of personal insight to lend.
And this is Uniquely Human, the podcast, a show that illuminates and celebrates autism and neurodiversity.
Well, Barry, this is a very exciting three-peat episode for us because we have one of our favorite humans back on the podcast again. I should say back on the podcast twice. This is third overall appearance. Becca Lory Hector is basically becoming our sweeps week guest. And this is a really, really fun conversation today because Becca has authored a book that I think is going to be so monumentally important for parents everywhere, also professionals. So I will let you do the formal introductions since I'm no good at those and I just tend to make stuff up. So why don't you relay some facts about our guest today?
And let me just chime in that I too am so pleased that Becca is on with us again. If you recall, last time we focused on Becca's expertise and her love for her animal family members. And we're going in a little bit of a different direction here based upon what she hopes to accomplish. And we're going to dig in talking about her book. So here are the facts, Dave. Becca Lory Hector is a passionate and seasoned autism and neurodiversity advocate, consultant, researcher, and author with a career dedicated to supporting and educating about autism. I'll tell you, I have gotten an education from Becca, so that is absolutely accurate. Based in Maine, she is focused on living an active and positive life, and she brings that same energy to all of her work. Her journey has led her to create tools and resources that empower others to embrace their authentic selves and live fulfilling lives. As an openly autistic adult, she has poured her lived experience into her writing and teaching. Her book, Always Bring Your Sunglasses and Other Stories from a Life of Sensory and Social Invalidation, offers a candid look at the challenges and triumphs of navigating the world as an autistic person. Alongside her book, Becca has designed and teaches a course called Self-Defined Living, A Path to a Quality Autistic Life, which is all about helping others find their own path to a fulfilling, self-empowered life. Let me just add a little comment here. One of my most favorite keynote addresses was seeing Becca speak a few years ago at the AANE conference on that topic, and it was just amazing.
Was Sir Walter Underfoot part of that?
No, he didn't come with me that time. I traveled without him. But having him in my life was part of that journey, right? It was making the decision to, yes, I need a dog and I need a particular kind of dog and I need my dog to do these things with me. That was certainly part of my journey.
Yes. So Dave, you were reading my mind. See, autistic people can read the minds of neurotypical people.
I stumble backwards into Barry's thoughts.
That's right. So the last piece that we need to know about Becca is that when she's not working, you will likely find her enjoying time with her husband, Antonio, and their many animals, especially my favorite dog name in the world, Sir Walter Underfoot, their emotional support animal. There we go. Okay, so so much of what you talk about in your book is about your history. So if you would briefly share your history, Becca, about growing up and seeing the world through an autistic lens, but growing up in a neurotypical world, but without a diagnosis.
Yeah. I mean, I think the reason I wrote this book is exactly that piece, that there's a group of us that received late in life diagnoses. Autism came into our world, when we were well into adulthood, right? I had lived over 3 decades on this planet before the word autism came into my life. And so I lived a lifetime that way. And I think it's really important that before we're all gone, those of us who got late in life diagnoses leave our stories behind, because there's something to be learned about those experiences that we had when we were fully unknowing and fully unsupported. Right? Like, what was that experience? A very raw experience. And so that's what I kind of set about to document in the book. I got my diagnosis, I mentioned, at 36 years old. I stumbled into it really in a strange way. I was on the internet. I was looking for some health related items and I stumbled into it, and it changed my life. It rocked my world is the way I want to explain it. It really just changed my entire life path. It gave me a chance to really do a lot of things with my life that I never imagined were even possible for me. And so this book is all about that time period of unknowing and what that was like when you're an unknowing child, right? Trying to live your life and you're surrounded by adults that also are unknowing, right? And not really helpful in gearing you towards the things you need.
And I think the thing, of course, that's going to capture a lot of people is the title. And you just explained what motivated you to write the book, but why the title?
The title is my favorite thing. So I think a book without a good title is really useless, right? There's two things that sell a book: a great title and a good cover, right? I mean, that's the majority of things. And so I wrote the whole book really without a title, right? Because the title has to come from the book. It needs to be in there, but it needs to be a good kind of snazzy thing. And I knew I was going to be writing about these moments of social invalidation and sensory invalidation that I'd had my whole life. And really, for me, sunglasses represent that. Right? There were times in my life where I needed my sunglasses and people told me not to wear them. Right? And because it was inappropriate, or I would feel shame about wearing them inside when there were fluorescent lights and things like that. And it was something that was at every point in my life. Should I bring my sunglasses? Should I bring my sunglasses? Can I wear them? Right. And that was always kind of what was the bane of my existence. Right. And so the answer to that question is just always bring them. Right. Yes. Just always have them with you. And then if you need them, you can wear them. Right. And that's the autistic motto about everything. We pack our sacks. We have our autistic, backpacks that we bring our tools with us where we go. And the freedom and the self-awareness to know you need those things and that you need to bring them is what comes with diagnosis. Right. You're no longer asking people for that permission. You know you need them. And so you should always have them. Right. And that's where the title came from. Yeah, and then, since we're on video, I'm sorry, guys, who are not going to be able to see us on video. But then I went and I bought myself, Dave, you will love it. I went and I bought myself yellow sunglasses. Stop it. Just like
there we go.
So I went and I got them for myself, right? Because if we're going to make a point, we're going to make a point.
Those are iconic.
That's really, thank you. They're on the cover of the book. We'll do a little branding. But it's the statement of like, I'm going to wear my headphones. I'm going to wear my sunglasses. I'm going to bring my fidget, right? I'm going to take what I need. And it shouldn't bother you that I bring these things with me. Right?
I know what supports me the best and makes me the best I can be. And in that good zone, as opposed to that dysregulated zone. So there.
Correct.
Well, yeah, we were just last night, Kristen and Emily and I went to see Brandi Carlile live at Red Rocks, and it was wonderful. It always is. And the three women next to us said, could you just watch our seats? We're going to go have a cigarette, right? And how many decades of smokers have we gone through where it was just like, oh, they just need a cigarette, give them a minute. And it's the exact same thing. And by the way, yellow sunglasses, far less intrusive to my little world around me than three people smoking cigarettes. So it That's just it. It comes with the diagnosis, but it also comes with a personal maturity that enables a person to say, I need this, and the tricky part is I need this and I'm fine needing it, so I'm just going to use it.
It's the I'm fine part that always comes to us too late, right? That's where I think the lesson is early on, we need to be giving kids that self-advocacy lesson, right?
Yes.
It's not, do I bring my sunglasses? Not yes or no, but I don't know. Do you think you'll need them? Right? Because that's the lesson is, do you think you'll need them? And if you think you will, let's take them, because that's really the takeaway, right? And if we do that early on, there's no me's and you's going, oh, I gotta wear my sunglasses, I'm so embarrassed, right? That doesn't happen.
Yeah. Right? Yes. I recall one of our previous guests and a good friend of ours, Chloe Rothschild, a couple of times shared, I love the comments, one was, even though I could speak, sometimes I want to use my AAC system. I want to use my iPad. I don't tell you how to communicate. And I like to watch Barney cartoons, and they say, well, you shouldn't do that. That's kind of childish, because I don't tell you what to watch at home.
Right. And it's like, and here's the thing, she chooses to share that with you. How many people secretly watch Barney and tell no one, right? Like that's, we have to think about those things. And it's the shame and the judgment around it. That's really the obtrusive part, right?
Yes, so much. And you do talk about your mom, of course, because she was navigating raising with love, raising you, but not knowing about autism or what you were experiencing. Do you want to share a little bit more about your relationship?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how else to say it except to say that my mom was my person. And I think that autistic people, we tend to have a person. And when we say a person, it's usually someone that we can trust entirely. We can be our authentic selves in front of, that we can unmask in front of, that knows us incredibly well, right? And that person tends to be our touchstone. Right? When we're going somewhere, what kind of clothes do I need to wear? Can I say this? Is it inappropriate? Can I, right? And we have our person, and that person helps us with the things that are hard for us. They are our, someone we can rely on for those things, and we don't have to be embarrassed to bring those things to that person, right? And that's who my mom was for me most of my life. And so that was especially important for me because my dad wasn't really a part of my life. So it was like a single parent situation. My parents were divorced. She was raising me alone in Queens, New York, right? I was going to huge New York City public schools, right? And I was getting lost. It was really what it was, right? I was getting lost. But my mom knew something was up. Like there were notes in my baby book about how I was intellectually advanced, but emotionally stunted, right? And things like that. There were notes all the way back to like my birth of my gastrointestinal issues, right? She'd been dealing with stuff since the moment I entered the planet, right? And so, but she didn't have a name for it either. And so she'd take me places or the school would bring up problems, right? And there they were, and she could kind of list them, but there wasn't a name for it. And no one was really saying, well, here's what you can do about it, or here's what's really going on. And it led to really, for me, a lot of medical trauma, and for my mom, a lot of misinformation, right? She was given a whole ton of misinformation about what people thought was happening for me that wasn't really happening for me. And she had to muck and mire through all of that and try to figure out, not only while trying to keep our house afloat and keep her job and all of these things, right? But also try to figure out, of the things people were telling her, which were the right things for her to be doing and which ones weren't. And because we had no name for it and there wasn't anything official going on, it was a lot of guessing, right? And it was a lot of mom's instinct. And that's the piece that that's the piece I want to leave parents with who are listening, is that underneath it all, without a diagnosis, without a name, whatever, my mom still knew me the best. She knew me second to how much I knew myself. She and I knew me best. It didn't matter how many doctors or diagnoses I got, right? There was still our truth about what was happening. And she ended up trusting her mom gut a lot. And that's really what got us through, was that she trusted her. At the end, she would take the information and decide what worked for us as a family and what didn't work for us as a family.
Yeah, I'm going to go a little academic and then bring Dave's experience in here.
Sure.
The academic piece is that, especially in the early intervention research, people talk about protective factors and risk factors. And a risk factor for you, and I know this firsthand growing up in New York City, is the whole environment, the craziness, the busyness, the stimulation. But your mom was an important protective factor. And what's so striking in comparison to Dave's upbringing, which he has spoken about and I know about, is that it sounds like growing up on a farm with a very regular routine and a physical lifestyle was a protective factor for you and not a risk factor. And now living up in Maine,
Yeah.
the environment.
Well, there's a reason I live rurally now, right?
Yeah.
Because I recognize the absolute absurdity of being an autistic person in the middle of New York City. That is
Yes.
like an oxymoron if ever one existed, right? And so it was one of the first things that I was like, oh, I'm autistic. What am I doing here? I gotta go. I gotta leave. I gotta get out of. I knew I wanted to leave, but now I understand why I wanted to leave. And I've left New York. I don't know how many years ago. It's been now 6 years. I've not looked back. I hate going to visit. I want nothing to do with it because it just doesn't match. It's not a match for my energy level, my vibes. It doesn't work.
Oh,
So I'm very jealous of Dave's growing up. Like I think I would have excelled. I would have been a happy tomboy kid, messy, dirty, and living my life instead of trying to stay clean like a good city kid. Right. That was really I was out in the mud myself, but on New York City sidewalks, like finding earthworms. That was as good as it got, Dave. It was never any better than that. And like, I was still seeking that same thing that Dave got naturally. And what I tell to our parents a lot is, and this sounds crazy, I know, but a lot of it is about where you live. Like how you feel about your kid and the way that you are supporting them has a lot to do with where you live. If you live in Massachusetts, you've got a great amount of supports around you. Everything's very forward thinking. You're in a good hot spot for supports and all of that. But not everyone has that luxury. But it has its bad side. When everyone knows all that and you live in a city, there's a lot of judgment that comes with living in the city, right? People are always looking at what you're wearing, how you're behaving when you arrive. But when you live in the country, people don't care about that stuff. People don't care what you look like. People don't care if you make noises. They care if you're participating in the community. They care if you're part of what's going on, and and that you're happy and participating. And that's the focus of living in rurally. People are too busy living here to care what you're wearing. And that takes away this pressure that city kids have to live with all the time, and their parents live with all the time, right?
Yeah.
And we work on the country is on a very natural schedule, right? We follow the seasons with our planting and and all of those things, and we also follow the day and night schedules, right? And so it's very harmonious to live rurally and very natural to the way we are humans as naturally. And I think city living puts another layer on being autistic and having an autistic family member that's maybe not necessary.
Yeah, I think where the only advantage I could see, and I've only visited New York, I've never lived there. The time that I've spent in New York, the only advantage I could see to a major giant city, for me personally, for my tastes, would be, when I was in elementary school, Michael Jackson was, at the height of the Michael Jackson-ness. And I didn't understand that his pants came up because he was a dancer, and that the white socks were just like a thing. So I thought it was a fashion thing. So I used to wrap tinfoil around the bottom of my pants to make it look like I was wearing sequin socks. Because my dad, my farmer dad, was not going to buy me sequin dancing socks. So they're just not practical for farm work. So, but if you wanted to be, and I got a lot of flack for that when I showed up at school and like my tinfoil fell off the bottom of my pants and I was like, oh no, my socks. So if you wanted to be, anonymous, and if you can't be out in a shack surrounded by 5,000 acres or something, of just wildland. If you want to be anonymous, I feel like sometimes when I was in these big cities like New York or, Chicago, whatever, to a better extent, New York, I could walk down the street doing the weirdest stuff. And people are just like, yeah, there's just another weirdo. It's like, yay, I'm not being. But on all, like you're saying, on all other counts, it's just like, is there a time of day when there's not fire trucks driving by and people whistling and
No, and you have to be like on alert all the time.
Yeah.
Right. You can't not be on alert. And so when I moved rurally, I thought everyone was suspicious. I was suspicious of everyone. Like, why are they so nice to me? What do they want from me? Are they going to try to sell me something? Why are they being so friendly? Right. Because in New York, it was really the opposite. If someone's talking to you, they want something. Otherwise, they're not talking to you. Right. In New York. And so it's a really surreal experience. But truly, it's like in the movies, the pace of life is different. There's not a rush to everything. And so people say things, oh, well, the transportation, a lot of autistic people can't drive. And so it's good to be in a city for transportation purposes, right? They have a lot better public. Okay, that may be true, but I venture that a bunch more autistics, if they learn to drive in the country, would be driving than when they learn to drive in the city. So for me, I learned to drive at 17, like you're supposed to do, right? But I grew up in New York, and so I learned to drive on the highways in New York City. So if you've ever seen pictures of the Grand Central Parkway or the Long Island Expressway, I had to learn to get on and off a highway like that. Exactly. And we have really short entry level, and you have to come on and be going as fast as you can. And there's no patience for you there, right? It was really scary. And it took me till I was like 21, 22 to be comfortable driving on the highway. It was too much, too fast all the time.
And your mom is, sitting there like, I'm looking at my friends, their kids picked up driving at 16, 17, and it was like 6 months they got their license. And that's, I think, the thing that parents deal with a lot is, how do I support this adequately? Because you can't just make a rule that says, family rule, you're okay with driving.
Right.
You really have to hang in there and say, like, how did you feel about today? Like, how did today go? Like, what did we learn? It's a much different approach.
And since we're all different, each one of us, right? The thing that is making it difficult is going to be different for all of us, right? Like for me, I have very, very limited sensory tolerance. And so driving was a huge sensory overload to me. And when I learned to drive, I had to figure out how to shut out as much as I could in order to learn to drive. So the way I taught myself was I put on the same cassette tape, because I'm not old. I put on the same cassette tape of Billy Joel. I did Billy Joel, and I think I went between Glass Houses and The Stranger back and forth until one got stuck in my cassette tape. But I would just play the same one because it was repetition, and it gave me safety. Like we watch our safety movies and all of those things. So I knew what songs were coming. I knew all the words, and I could lean into the repeat and close all my windows. And then my brain was like, okay, now you can focus and look at what's ahead of you and what's coming on the left. And I had to teach myself that. But it took years because there wasn't somebody saying, oh, right, you're autistic, you're going to be sensory sensitive, this might be overwhelming. Let's not start on the highways. Let's start somewhere
of New York.
Right.
Well, just to interject a point from a former New York cabbie when I took what they now call a gap year after college. I think a lot of people don't realize when you drive in places like, especially New York, you have to be aware 360 degrees. It's not a matter of just looking straight ahead. You really, and 360 degrees visually, auditorily, in many sensory modalities. So it's like, oh, okay. And as you said, then you have to be very selective as to what you ignore and screen out. I suppose now it's important to look at what's going on at 11 o'clock on that angle here.
Right. And that can be really, really difficult. And when we talk about driving, right, I think the other piece of driving is that people don't really follow the rules. So the great thing about autistics is that we love the rules. And I love a good driving rule. I know when my signal's supposed to go on. I know in what order I'm supposed to leave the stop sign. I know all of that stuff, right? And I am ready, but nobody else is doing it. All those rules don't apply to everybody else, right? And so it makes you learn to drive really defensively, right? Because I assume My assumption is that no one's going to follow the rules in front of me. So even though they're right, someone's still going to go through, or someone's still going to turn without turning on their blinker, right? And do things, because I'm a guesser. I know where you're headed and that kind of thing. And so that's what happens to us. And it almost breaks our brain. It's like,
Yes.
that's so broken. You gave us rules. I had to pass the test.
Yes.
But then
Yes.
the test is over. Now we don't care. Right.
Right.
It's very strange.
It's the one. It drives me, by the way, this is a sidebar, but it infuriates me when people wave me through the intersection. It's like, dude,
there's a rule.
Yeah, we finally authored rules for how to engage socially in one tiny sliver of this life experience, and you're even messing that up. Like, everything doesn't have to be a game. You know what's interesting, too, about the driving thing, Becca, is, as you know, and you do, you are a corporate coach as well, where you work with corporations on, neurodiversity, DEI, and that's super important work. So I'm back in the corporate world after vowing never I will return. And then a opportunity came. I was like, oh yeah, I'll do that. One of my very first trips a couple months ago was up and down California. So started in Southern California up to Northern California. And my manager happened to be there with me. Because we were going around introducing ourselves. And I was the one driving, because that's my rule. Like, I don't ride in cars. So I was driving and having to navigate new cities that I'd never driven in before. And my manager was talking. So what you were describing really resonates with me because I'm very successful getting around when I can create my environment inside the car.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter if it's a rental car in San Diego or my own car in Denver. I've got the same playlist on. I've got my routine. I wipe the car down with, sanitary wipes and everything. So or sanitizing wipes. And when somebody is then talking, it disrupts that whole thing and it becomes very dysregulating. So then I would have to go from like white knuckling on the steering wheel to like get yourself together and then have a really good presentation in front of the customer. And when you're talking about a safe person or I call them angels, whatever you want to call them, but you've got your person. And if that's your mom in the car with you and you can say like, this is how I need to drive. So as you're teaching me, they can get on board. And, I think it's really important to learn early how to self-advocate because then when you're like me, a 47-year-old adult sitting in a car with his manager, it's okay to say like, all right, I'm going to need actually just some quiet here for the next 20 minutes while we're navigating these weird streets.
Yeah.
Massively important.
And I think it also has to do with being able to juggle various levels and types of stimulation. So let me just say, as a senior citizen, it also becomes a sensitivity with age because I think the most common thing I say to Elaine, my wife, in the car is, I need to focus. I need to focus. And it definitely is highly correlated with how much traffic there is or entering a lane at that point. So, so I think some of the things we're talking about, and Becca just said a few minutes ago something about, it's too much for my brain. An important topic that you speak about in the book, and we're approaching that here, is autistic burnout. Now, maybe we're talking about mini little burnouts here, but as opposed to the big autistic burnout. Right. But of course, that has received a lot of attention in recent years, primarily from autistic people describing what it's about. And I think many of our listeners maybe are either only superficially familiar with the notion or not at all. So if you would like to talk about autistic burnout and especially how that was viewed when you were a child, as just being difficult or difficult behavior.
I mean, so here's the thing about autistic burnout, and I'm very particular about when I use this word because it means something very specific to me and to most autistic people. So when I'm having like a crappy day and I'm just kind of like not feeling great, or I'm not feeling as productive, or I'm having struggles with sensory, that's just like a shutdown day for me. That's just like, I'm just having like a crappy day. Burnout is its own animal. And I cannot express to you enough how much I need you to understand that it is its own beast. Okay. The first thing about burnout is that it doesn't happen after a day's socializing. Okay. Burnout happens over a course of months or years to people. It's a slow and continuous buildup of exhaustion and fatigue and stress and just being pulled to, to have all of your energy pulled in a million different directions. And then all of a sudden you say, I can't. It's like your brain just goes, I can't anymore. And it just says no. And it goes bloop. And that's how I describe it. It just goes, it turns in on itself almost, your brain. It just goes, no, thank you. And you find yourself just depleted. And there's no fighting it, first of all. And what's sad is if we try to fight it, a lot of us will try to battle and beat through somehow the autistic burnout, but we end up putting ourselves in a worse place because we get into a really negative mental space then. So it's not just an exhaustion and all over needing to rest. It's then we put ourselves into a state of depression on top of it, right? And we like layer it with other things too, the longer we push through. So most people will tell you, oh, a couple of years and they got into burnout. That they think it took them about that time. So what I say to people is it's a long process for someone to get into autistic burnout. It's not, oh, they had a tough week or a tough day. It's like, no, I've had to struggle for the last 2 years to keep my life balanced and regulated, or 3 years or 4 years, right? And that's how long it takes till your brain finally just breaks on you. And what I want to remind people is it takes you that long to get there. So the way out is twice as long. Okay. People think, oh, I was in burnout. I'm going to stop. I'll take a week off and I'm going to be back at it next week. And that's a Band-Aid. It's a Band-Aid on your bleeding. And that's all that's happening. Right. And you just end up needing to change Band-Aids. And so the real cure is to really understand that you're in burnout and to take the amount of time you truly need to recover, which if it took you 2 years to get there, it might take you 4 years to feel back to yourself. Right. 100%. And knowing that you need that kindness, that it's not a light switch that you can flip and turn back on. Right. It doesn't happen that way. You didn't get there that way. You can't get out that way. And autistic burnout feels like a combination of the worst version of COVID you could ever get and the worst version of depression you could get at the same time. So it's like your body and your brain cannot do anything. Going to the bathroom is a struggle, right? Getting our hair cut, to getting washed, changing our clothes, everything, all those basics, even they just get dropped as priority. We can't even care for ourselves, right? And that's a state that nobody wants to be in. Nobody wants to feel like they don't even have the energy to go to the bathroom. That's a craziness. That's like, right. So what we see, what it looks like on the outside are people isolating, somebody going into their bedroom with their basement for a couple of years or a couple of months, right? It looks like somebody quitting their job randomly, right? Or leaving a boyfriend or a girlfriend randomly, right? Because everything just becomes too much and we need to disappear and take care of ourselves. That's what anybody else would instinctually do, right? You would say, oh, let me stop doing all the things that hurt and recover. And to us, it's everything. It's like everything outside of our safe space, which is often our room or our home or our apartment, right? Or our car. And everything outside of that safe space feels too much.
I've never experienced autistic burnout, and it's heartbreaking to hear somebody is trying, and then they just hit a wall. Because you're not hitting a wall because you're deciding one day, like, I'm going to check out from society, my family and friends. No, you've been carrying it's sort of like carrying a backpack of rocks or something up a hill, but people keep adding rocks. And eventually you're just like, what are we doing? I am done. Like, you guys continue. I don't care anymore. It sounds like that. And what would you say, like, well, let me ask you this. When you have experienced this, when was the youngest that you remember experiencing this? Like, I'm out.
It's so upsetting to say it, but so for a long time, I would say even for like 5 years after my diagnosis, I would have said to you, it was the point in which I received my diagnosis. So at 33 years old, I had this moment, right, of the bag of rocks got too much, and I just went, plop, and I dropped the bag of rocks. I felt my brain go pop, And I went, adios, world. I walked out of a room that I was in the middle of a conversation with people, walked out of the room, walked straight to my car, got in my car, drove home to the apartment that I grew up in, climbed into the bed that I grew up in, and said, I'm done.
Wow.
That is what burnout can feel like. So, it was like, I just right on it. And I would have told you that was the moment. I spent the next 3 years suicidal and homebound after that moment. Okay. And my autism diagnosis is what saved my life. I ran into my autism diagnosis. I got it. And that's why I'm not dead right now, is literally because of that. And so that's how I lived really for those first 5 years post-diagnosis, was like, oh, I had this autistic burnout. It got me my diagnosis, blah, blah, blah. But when I look back, it wasn't my first time. It wasn't my first rodeo. My first rodeo was when I was about 12 years old. I was, we were moving, of course, from, primary school to middle school. It's a big deal in New York City at that age to make that shift. You're going from being in the same class all the time to having to move to different classes and different teachers, right? Socially, we're all shifting in a very big way at that time. Everybody's kind of seeking independence, right? And they're trying to be their own authentic selves, right, at that age. And it's very competitive. In that moment, that all came together for me. And I had already been struggling, right? All of my life in school. School was never an easy place. And in that moment, I remember just being like, you know what? F this shit. That's what I just said. I said, just screw it all. I don't care. I'm done. I know more than, and then it became an arrogance almost. It was like, I know more. I know the things you're teaching me in school. I can read those things by myself and teach them to myself. Why am I torturing myself this way? Adults are stupid. And what I have to remind you is that at this time, I was 12, all of these things had started for me at a very young age. I had been in therapy and people were misdiagnosing me by the age of 12. I had already received a bunch of different labels, right? And I already knew that those labels didn't fit, right? They weren't working, nor were the medications I was being given. So if I looked at the grown-ups as the big stupids in the world. I was like, you guys don't know anything. You tell me to trust you. You tell me to look to you to protect me, but you clearly know nothing, right? So if you know nothing, why should I sit there and learn from you all day and torture myself when I could read the things I want to be reading and I could teach myself the things I want to learn, right? Because school takes that away from us. It doesn't leave us enough time as autistics to pursue our special interests, to spend time alone, to do any of those things. And so I had hit a wall of not having any of the things that I needed to take care of myself accessible to me. And I couldn't trust the adults around me. So I said, adios, friends. And I just stopped going to school.
Oh, man.
Flat out going to school. And so I was told I had school phobia, school anxiety. I was told I was a school refuser. I was told I was a lot of things, but what I wasn't told was I was an autistic person in burnout.
So I'm going to try to connect some dots here. Okay. Another, when I talk about a hot topic, it's on social media, what everybody's talking about. Now books are coming out, pathological demand avoidance.
Yeah.
Do you see that as a label that is a symptom of autistic burnout? Possibly.
No, I don't think so, because I think PDA in and of itself is something that folks struggle with all the time. I think if you truly are somebody who has PDA and you're struggling with, and that's real, it's really a fight for autonomy. That's what PDA is. It's really people just fighting to be able to be in control of their lives in as much of a way as possible. That's what it is. And not being in control creates a lot of anxiety for them. And that's what the PDA is, I think, really about. Do we see PDA-like behavior in autistics at burnout? I think so. I think if you're someone who's naturally kind of a PDA, it probably ups its ante on you at that time. Burnout tends to highlight all of the things that are really hard for us. It tends to be like, these are all the terrible things. Let's give you more of that. Like, that's what burnout does. And it makes it very difficult for you to see anything else but that. It makes it really hard for you to find the good things, to find the joy, to find the glimmers, to find it makes it really, because there's so much else of everything else. And I think that's really the PDA piece for us. It's like, I don't want to do that anymore. It's not working. And no one's listening to me say it's not working. So I'm just going to stop.
So in addition to some things you've already kind of shared in our conversation, I'm thinking about something that you mentioned in your book that helps. And that's the understanding that autistic people and children learn, in a sense, by doing, not by observing, not by observation. And I think that's a point that, of course, we have to drive home, because people think still very traditionally that the kid who sits there and listens and just learns what's being thrown at them is the good learner.
Right.
So your experiences on this, and what would you say to parents?
I think that's the biggest lie ever. I just think I don't think really anybody learns well by being told things, right? There's a difference between memorizing, right, and actually learning something or understanding how it works or why we do it, right? That's a whole different part of learning than just memorizing. I think really, if you tortured somebody enough, they could memorize something, right? I think that's the way that we figured school would be, right?
And part of the history of autism, yeah.
Right. And along that way, we'll just, keep shoving it down, and eventually it'll take, right? That was our whole goal, right? Instead of asking ourselves, as you always say, Barry, the why behind, right? Like, why is this happening? I need to understand, right? And so it's really like, for me, you can tell me things all you want. And I'm like, that's great. But remember, I'm somebody who, I like the truth. I like facts. I like rules. I like things that are very tangible to me. And so it's great that you told me this lovely story about how to drive a car, and I can repeat back to you exactly when you're supposed to shift in a manual. I can tell you when you're supposed to press that pedal, but it's entirely different experience to sit in that driver's seat, right? And try to make your body do all of those things at the same time your brain is thinking about it, right? And so there's more to learning how to do something than just the facts of how it's done, right? And just being able to repeat the steps. And what it feels like to do it is an incredibly important experience for autistic people. What does it feel like to press the pedal when I'm driving a car? How fast does it, like that sensation? How fast does it take off? How sensitive is that pedal, right? All of those things, because we need to adjust our bodies to that. And you don't tell me any of that when you're teaching me how to drive a manual. And I can't know any of those pieces when you tell me about them. Right? What does it mean that the pedal is sensitive? I don't know what that means, right? And so those are the pieces we need when we're being taught things. The experiential piece of what it feels like to move through the space to do an activity, right? I just wrote this book, and I want to tell you that I lived in fear of writing a book. I will never be able to finish it. I don't know how it's going to happen, blah, 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 right? Because I've never written a book, right? So I don't know. Now I've written a book, and I can tell you all the things that I thought were going to be hard about it weren't hard. There were other things that were hard, right? And I know a lot more about it because I've been through the process. And so now I'm like, oh, no, I can write books, right? I get it. Now I can say that with confidence, right? And it's that same process. I need to do it. My body needs to do it to retain it and to understand why I'm doing it, right? Because autistic, we're not energy wasters. We are energy savers. And we will not waste our energy on things we don't understand the why behind. If we're not in on you for why we're doing it, we ain't doing it. Like, if you don't give me context, don't ask me to do something. I need all the context. Right?
Right. I need a context down to the atomic level.
Exactly. And then I will get up my butt. Then I'm going to start moving. Once I have it, right, then we have motion.
Yes.
And I think
absolutely
don't do that for autistic kids because they can't say, I need context, right? But that's what we need to provide them with is, here, we're going to do this thing. You have to go to school today. Why? Why do I have to go to school today? Okay, well, let's really talk about it, right? Because you're going to have to go to school for the next 10 years or whatever it is. So let's make sure it's a why that you're behind. Right? Because if we stop to ask that question, they're not in. No, you're not buying in. You've lost your autonomy. Right?
Right. And also the context, but also the supports. You provide context, you provide supports, and that comes back to the whole point of this conversation we're having, which is bring your backpack of stuff. Bring your things. Like, yeah, you have to go to school. Is it what you'd rather do? Probably not. But these are your tools, so use them throughout the day.
Yep. Here's how you get through. Here's how you get by. Here's how you ask for help. Here's how you ask for a break. right? Those are the pieces that I wasn't given, was that it's okay to need a break. Go ahead and ask for one, right? And that concept of, if you don't ask, the answer is already no. That was something that was not imparted upon me as a child, right? Like,
Right.
oh, wait a second. If I don't ask, then I'm never getting what I want or what I need. I have to ask to get it. Right? Not left in, but it's true. And sometimes you might not get it, but if you don't ask, you're definitely not getting it. Right. And so we need to teach our kids to ask. They need to say what they need to know what they need first. And we take that away when we don't let them talk about it. So they need to know what they need first, and then they need to know how to ask for it and who to ask for help with it. Right. You need to know who to ask and when you need that help. And that helps you as an adult, right? All the way through.
Life skill. Yep.
Isn't there also a relationship and trust issue here? That it's a basic sign of respect to another person to say why this might be helpful, or the deeper meaning, as opposed to jump when I say jump.
Right. Well, don't you? That's what I always think about when I am childless by choice. And these are some of the reasons why. Right. I didn't have an easy time growing up. I didn't have great relationships with my parents or the adults in my life. Right. And so I didn't really want to repeat a lot of the mistakes that I lived through. Right. And I also kind of knew innately that my sensory system was so sensitive that I would probably be a horrible mother. Like, I can't even go to my crying child. What kind of mother would I be? Right. And so I just kind of opted out of that piece. But what I think parents are missing are all the pieces that I wish I had, even though I'm not a parent. Those pieces of, it's okay to ask for help. Here's who you ask for it from. Here's how to know who a good person is to ask for help, right? Like those things. I feel like that stuff is not given to our kids. We just tell them what to do a lot. And we kind of think that's how we're giving them direction, but we're not giving them that the ability behind it, which is the self-awareness to know what they need, and also knowing when they need the help, right? That it's okay to do that. Because I don't know anybody who lives their life without help, right?
And,
like,
well, that's just, you're so right. And parents, a lot of times, as a parent, now I understand why my mom and dad, I always kind of got it, but now I understand why my mom and dad were always like, just go play with your brother, if they were working on something, like, can I help?
Right.
Like, no, God, I don't want you to help. And now I understand, like, you have to make a choice as a parent in so many moments throughout the day. Is this something where you have to understand the assignment? Is the assignment get the noodles cooked perfectly without spilling any water, and then get this food on the table so we can eat and then move on? Or is the assignment, hey, it wouldn't hurt, if you did want to help, just, we're going to make a big mess probably, but go for it. Like, help me make make this pasta. And my struggle for many, many years as a parent was, no, it needs to be done perfectly. I'll do it. And then when I made the switch to, you know what, none of this matters. So sure, go for it. It made it so, like, it made it so much easier. My kids were much older at that point. They weren't just toddlers and things. But it's like you said, Becca, if there's no manual for how to ask someone for help or who to trust, that we can study and learn, there's definitely no manual for parenting. And if there is a manual for parenting, there is no chapter on parenting autistic kids. It's just like, right? There's so much. We're a confusing bunch.
We are a confusing bunch, but we are, in some ways we're confusing, and in other ways what we need from our parents is for them to go back to basics, right? That, like, not to overthink parenting for us. That's, what I mean? Like, I think it's like, my kid is different, so now I have to somehow parent in this big different kind of way. No, the rules of parenting don't change just because your kid is autistic, right? You still want to love your kid. You still want to have a happy kid. You still want your kid to be safe, and you still, right? It's still the same things. It's how you get there that's going to be different. It's the path, right? And the order of events might be different, right? We might learn some things before we learn other things, but don't discount us from learning things down the road. And, like, don't, we still are on that same path that every other kid is on. We are hopefully working towards being happy and healthy adults, right? That is the goal. And I think how we all get there, that's that's where the parents really get to decide. What kind of adult do you want to raise? right? And how do you want them to get there? How, what is the route to getting there? Do you want to be a part of it? Do you not want to be a part of it? Certainly there are some parents that opt out, right? And so that's a choice that people get to make. But for autistic kids, not overthinking it is like supreme. Yeah. Like, don't just, we're not happy, we're crying, we're having a meltdown. Okay, something's wrong, right? It's just just leave it in its basicness and follow that parenting instinct, right? Because that is organic. Yeah. It's your kid. You know your kid. You can tell that they're upset. You know that, right? So just, it's like shut that out when you're home with your kid for a little bit and just be there with your
I think this is going to be the first time I've plugged my wife, Elaine Meyer's TED Talk. And you guys know Elaine well. And the title of the TED Talk is on being present and not perfect. And it's directed towards healthcare professionals. It's like, don't think everything you say or everything you do has to be perfect. Sometimes your patients in hospital settings, which is where she consults, sometimes you just need to be present and listen and observe and go with what's happening. And don't set the bar so high that you're always judging and you're always casting aspersions on that person because it's not exactly right. And that's a way to build trust. Yeah.
Well, imagine what a clean slate you are. So like my parents had, I always refer to it as my parents had the luxury of me not having an autism diagnosis or Asperger's diagnosis, more accurately for the time, when I was growing up, because it was just like, there's our quirky kid. All right. As long as he follows the rules. So they set behavioral expectations. And I almost feel like out of the just goodness of their heart, if they had known that I had some kind of condition that othered me, that they would maybe set different expectations. I don't know. They're pretty strict, so maybe this, maybe not. But, but they set behavioral expectations and followed through on consequences. So I was kind of brought up in a you don't get a pass, you don't get anything special, because they weren't aware. And Barry, imagine what a clean slate you would be to a doctor if they didn't come in with a chart, if you didn't already have to give the nurse some of your symptoms, if they just walked in cold, like, hey, how are you doing? Well, and you start talking and let their mind start working before they're reading your symptoms. I think
I might actually go to the doctor if that was the case.
right.
Because otherwise it just feels transactional. I'm always going, why did I have to come here? We couldn't have done this on Zoom. I could have told you my symptoms. And, you're not taking my temperature or doing anything with my person. So why did I come here and sit in the waiting room for 20 minutes?
Yeah. And,
yes.
Dave, let me just jump in, because I think sometimes people hear the word strict and they think strict negatively toned. And I don't see, probably your parents were very consistent and predictable, but with support. Because I think when we talk about the old notion of strict and you need structure, very often it is this outward controlling demand that's placed, as opposed to what I do and what I expect. There's a consistency and a predictability to that, which, as I like to say, we all thrive from that. But correct me if I'm wrong, you guys, autistic people crave that more than neurotypical people, that consistency and predictability.
Yeah, Becca and I had different experiences growing up. She craved autonomy, and she was looking up the chain at the adults and saying, like, dude, I can figure this out without your help, and when you try, you get it wrong, so out of my way. I was much different. I was more pathetic in a way, where it was, I want everybody to just prescribe for me, tell me how to live my day, and I'll do that so I don't have to guess. There were a couple times where chores, we lived on a farm, so chores conflicted with me wanting to just like watch the Three Stooges or something. And on a farm, if you don't do your chores, it's not like, well, your room is still messy. It's, oh, the cows didn't eat, right? Like there's real consequences to other living beings. But I'll let Becca speak to I personally craved, these are the rules, follow the rules, and as a condition, you get to live here. But I don't know if that really jived with
It's really funny that we're talking about this because really and truly our growing up experiences were really opposite. We genuinely had this really different experience.
Yes.
So what was really hard for me is that my mom was very much a hippie. She was very like big. And I think that's why I had a lot of things easier. She was willing to think outside of the box of what people were telling her most of the time. But that also meant that she was a very free spirit who did things spontaneously. She did was very, and so in my house, I was the rule maker because I couldn't stand the lack of routine. I was like, this is nonsense. How do you live your life like this? Do you know what I mean? It was an absurdity to me to not be prepping for things. And so my mom, in that same way, my mom and I were opposites, right? And it's so I mean, it was well, mom, there were certain things that, and as I got older, it was put your things in the dishwasher. There's rules about that. And you can't just leave things, right? I was that kid because my mom was very much a child at heart and was very which was fine when I was in kindergarten. But then as I grew into my autisticness, it was this is absurd living. You're crazy, lady. I can't do this.
I think you two guys should write a book and call it the yin yang of autistic upbringing.
Right.
Well, the great thing about that is Becca will take the project by the horns, and I will just be told what to do, and it'll be a perfect working relationship.
Oh my goodness. Oh, wow. Okay. I think there's one more important issue. These are wonderful conversations. Goodness. That you do discuss in your book. And that's the issue of masking. And again, I'm raising this because it's become such a huge issue in recent years that's come to the forefront for people to understand. Yeah. So if you want to talk about that a bit.
I do, especially because we've talked about burnout. Yeah. I happen to think that masking is the #1 cause of autistic burnout. Mm-hmm. And what do we mean by masking, right? I guess we should define it a little bit. And so to me, that means doing alternative behaviors and making alternative choices that are not your innate choices, but you are making based on social expectation. Right. And so it's the sunglasses thing all over again, right? Can't wear sunglasses inside, social expectation, right? So in a masking case, I would not wear my sunglasses and I would struggle through an occasion, right, to be socially acceptable. Mm-hmm. Whereas if I'm unmasking, I wear my sunglasses no matter where I am if I need them, period. Right. And so that's the difference. And just in that example, you can imagine what the experience would be like. A masked person suffering through needing sunglasses or needing earplugs and just pushing through versus taking care of their needs, right? And how different that experience would be, right? Mm-hmm. One is much more exhausting and creates a lot more anxiety versus the other one, which is allowing you to be your authentic self and take care of your needs, right? But most autistics, in an effort to fit in our world with our social expectations, must live a masked life. Mm-hmm. And the place that they mask the most is at the workplace. So no, we don't see it go away in adulthood, right? Masking mm-hmm. continues further and all the way into adulthood. And the further and more important someone is, the higher up in a company, the more masking they are doing, right? Mm-hmm. It's really, really true. And so what that means for autistics is that being someone at that level and doing a job at that level is extremely uncomfortable, right? Mm-hmm. Because we have to ultimately mask. What it looks like for us as little kids is holding in our need to move, right? Not mm-hmm. moving when we need to move, eating things that we don't want to eat, right? Mm-hmm. Wearing clothes we don't want to wear, right? Doing and saying certain things we don't want to say, staying places we don't want to be, right? It's a lot of saying yes to things you should have said no to. It's a lot of people pleasing, right? That's what masking is. And what it ultimately does is it takes a lot of effort. And that takes energy away from doing all the other things you should be doing as a human being, mm-hmm. like taking care of yourself, taking care of your finances, having some joy, falling in love, getting married, like all of those things fall to the wayside when you have to mask all the time in your life. Mm-hmm. Most autistics are lucky enough to have a space in their life where they can unmask, whether it's home or their bedroom, but there are some autistics that aren't even comfortable enough in their own homes to unmask. And that freaks me out, right? So if you are a parent and you're thinking about your child and thinking about this concept of masking, understand that they learn to mask at home. That's where it comes from. We learn to mask and cover our things because our parents tell us to. We don't innately feel there is anything wrong with us. We're just doing our thing. It's the judgment from outside that makes us feel that it's wrong, and that creates guilt and shame, and that's what leads to masking, right? And so what we see is that people who have to mask intensely over long periods of time end up in burnout, right?
I'm getting this image, being a school consultant, of going into a classroom. Now, thankfully, it's not the same as it used to be, but a little chart that the teacher puts up in the front of the room that says rules of good behavior: quiet body, quiet hands, quiet mouth.
Yes.
Maybe we should change that to rules for masking.
Right, it is, but that's what we were teaching when we were doing social skills training, right? We were teaching masking directly, right? That's what we're doing when we do that. It's directly teaching masking.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, and there's a time and place. There's when people are all kind of together and in a moment together, like if it's a very solemn moment or somber moment, there's a time and place where masking can be appropriate, but finite.
Right, but
30 minutes.
So the thing about masking is it is so tempting to use. As an autistic person, it is the best. You want to talk about a glorious support? Masking is the best. And if you're good at it, great, fantastic.
Bingo.
Because I'm such a good masker, I can get into any job interview I want. I do the best job interviews, right?
Yes.
Because that's that is an exercise in masking. That's what that is, right?
Yes.
And really, right, what we've done is give people this expertise in not being themselves. Right. That's what we did, right? But it's successful.
Right.
So that's the right? And so what we need to teach our kids is how do they be their authentic selves, right? And get what they need without having to mask. We need better alternatives, right? To just pretending, which is essentially pretend that doesn't bother you. That's what we tell our kids. Oh, pretend that those shoes aren't upsetting you. Oh, pretend that this food doesn't make you want to vomit. Oh, pretend. That's what masking is. And then that let's play pretend goes all the way into adulthood.
Yes.
Right.
And by the way, it's not even like, let's play pretend for your sake. It's let's pretend that doesn't bother you for my sake, for my peace.
Right. So that I'm not embarrassed, so that I feel that you did these, right? And when I talked to, I had a parent who was working with a therapist for their kid, whatever, and they had to decide the things that they were going to work on that year in therapy, right? What are our goals for therapy? And one of the goals, legitimately in black and white, that the parent and the therapist agreed upon is how to greet a room. How to greet a room.
How to greet a room.
How many of us were taught growing up the rules of greeting a room, in what order we're supposed to greet people, or how? No, we all do the same thing. If you walk into a room with people in it, we all look around for the person who's the most friendly, the one we know the best, right? Or the one we're there to see. And we go beeline, hi, how are you, blah, blah, blah. And then we all hope to meld into the crowd.
Right.
That is how you greet a room. That is the truth of greeting a room, right? But I know that's not what those kid and that therapist are going to be working on. You walk into the room, you need to smile big, right? How are you supposed to greet a room? What is that? And I turn to the parent and I'm like, well, how many rooms do you guys enter like that? Like
full of people.
Is that a regular part of your life, or is that really like a false goal? And is the kid on it? Did the kid want to learn how to greet a room? Probably not, right?
The kid probably doesn't even want to be in the room.
Right.
And so we have to really think about what is it? What are we seeking from our different kids? Do we really want them to be the same as everyone else? Is that really the end goal, or do we just want them to be happy and healthy and like themselves? Right.
And just a little bit of overlap, at least in my neurotypical experience. And I'm going to tie in one of the things you bring up in your book about going to the bathroom far too often than you need it. Okay, so I don't like small talk. I'm married to a person who loves small talk, and I know the benefits of that. We get to meet people we've never met before who end up being, hey, this is a pretty cool person, and maybe it wouldn't have happened. But when I am in a social situation where small talk is required, I will go to the bathroom far more often than I need to. Because it's stressful. It's difficult. That's my getaway space. And you mentioned that in your book. That was your getaway space in school.
It was. I learned that really young. It was like super lesson. Where's the one place that you can't bother people? The bathroom. They're in the bathroom. Don't you bother them? They're in the shower. They're going to the bathroom. Don't you bother them? Right? Oh, well, that gets flipped on its head really fast, right? If I can't be bothered in the bathroom, guess where I'm headed, right? And so that's really what happened for me, was that I was like, oh, that's a brilliant, right? My little autistic brain was like, no one can bother me in there. And no one can tell me I can't go, and no one can know that I don't have to go to the bathroom. This is perfect, right? It was a perfect setup. And so that was the way for me when I felt like I couldn't take like another second of sitting in that classroom under that light, listening to the kid next to me shake his leg and the other kid click his pencil and the freaking clock going tick, 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 right? That I would just be like, bathroom, pass, right? And as I got older, of course, people would think I was smoking in the bathroom and doing drugs in the bathroom, and all these things would happen as we got older, right? Yeah. But all the way until my diagnosis, the bathroom was my safe space.
Yes. Yeah. You know,
my whole life.
And I just want to be clear. I do not believe, Barry's saying there's a little bit of autism in all of us. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that sometimes insight into your own experience as a neurotypical person maybe gives you a little glimmer of what an autistic person experiences at a much more intense, regular.
It's much more frequent. It's more intense, right? Yeah. It's not an inhuman experience. The autistic experience is still a human experience, right? It's just that we're dialed in a different way, right? It's just, that's what it is. We have different settings. I don't know how else to say it, right? And so those things happen to us more frequently, right? Yes. But if I turn to almost anyone and say, oh my God, I was at this terrible party and I couldn't take it for another second. So I got up and I went to the bathroom for like 20 minutes. That's where I'm calling you from. Yeah. Right? If I did that, the person on the phone would be like, I got you. I'm here. What do you want to talk about? Right? They know, because we've all been there. Yes. But what we need to understand is that happens to autistics in a smaller amount of time, right? With a smaller amount of people, right? If more frequently, we're just more sensitive to that feeling.
And right? I think the cumulative impact, as you spoke about with burnout, we're not talking about burnout right now, but the cumulative impact is probably much, much more kind of pervasive and having a long-lasting effect, I think, than it does.
It is, and there's a sadness that comes with that for me, which is that what that means for autistics is that we often miss out on things that other people kind of don't, that other people just take for granted. So we expend a lot of our energy through this masking process and dealing with autistic burnout, knowing that that's around the corner all the time and all of that stuff, which means we're always making choices about what it is that we can or can't do. And we're always thinking about our energy in that way. And what that means is that we miss out on a lot of stuff a lot of the time. Yeah. And so what I want people to understand is that the very first thing I remember being taken away from me and criticized and that I became ashamed about wasn't my sunglasses, it was my joy. So since I was a very young child, my joy was judged and criticized. The things I found joy in, the way I expressed my joy, all of those things were criticized. And what that means is I learned to mask my joy. Crazy, right? And then I learned that it wasn't as important as the masking, and so I just stopped having joy. Mm-hmm. And what most autistic adults will tell you is that they don't have joy in their lives. They're too busy trying to hold all the plates up and make everyone else around them happy and comfortable to think about their own joy, to even know what brings them joy. And that's a quality of life issue that I take very personally, that I'd like to see change.
And those are the kinds of insights that led us once again saying we have to have Becca on. It's so important for everybody to hear that and change, as we like to say, their attitudes, actions, and relationships to make more space for that joy and for that joy to be experienced. So
yep, because it doesn't come from the outside. That joy is on the inside, and we put that flame out.
Yep.
Right. Becca, thank you so much. I think we actually covered almost all the bases that we felt would be important to cover, but people need to get your book.
Get my book. I'll pitch it very quickly. It's very short. It's only 100 pages. I wrote it for us. I wrote it for the autistics and the ADHD folks who can't sit through a whole book. I wrote it for parents out there who don't have time for a whole book, right? And just want the meat and potatoes. That's who I wrote it for. It's meant to be read and then like passed on to someone else. I find a lot of autistics are using it with their diagnosis as a way to explain and share their experiences, give people a window into some of our language and some of the things we talk about. But it was written intentionally short because I wanted somebody like my mom to be able to read it, right? Mm-hmm. That was the goal. Mm-hmm. And so, it's for us. And the audiobook is out there too for accessibility if you're not a reader.
Where do we find it?
On Amazon. Just head to Amazon. You can get the book there. You can get the Kindle there. And you can also get the audiobook there.
And we will have the link on the webpage associated with this episode. And remember, always bring your sunglasses.
Absolutely.
And that is the title to remember, yes. Thank you, Becca. Once again, it was a pleasure, and if I might say, a joy to have you on.
My pleasure. I love
my
them.
happy place. So.
100%. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Take care.